Check out my sweet suspenders. Welcome or welcome back. If you are new here, my name is Allie, aka Unicorn Allie. On my channel, I discuss a variety of topics related to my unique life experience, including but not limited to chronic illness content, burlesque, mental health, lots of queer magic, and everything in between. If you hear any weird noises during the filming of this video, I have my fluffy butt over here. She should be sleeping, but she won't be. She might jump into the shot at some point. If you are not new here, you might have noticed that it's been a hot minute since I've made any videos, and there are two main reasons for that. Number one is it's the holiday season right now, and maybe not for the typical reasons. I've been a bit distracted. I haven't lived in the US for almost 7 years now, and I haven't had to deal with a lot of the uncomfortable aspects of the holidays here. Thanksgiving. So I took a little time to do a lot of research for a video that I'm very excited about how to decolonize your holidays, Thanksgiving as well as other holidays. I think it's all applicable, particularly in the US, but also in any Western or colonized region. And also during that time, I had an exciting step in my mental health journey. I stepped down on some of my medication, which was really exciting. However, I'm very sensitive to medications, so pretty much all of the potential withdrawal symptoms I experienced, which is fine, it's normal. It just made my headspace a little weird for filming and such. Yes, ma'am. Do you need something? Come up here. Say hello. This is Willow, if you haven't met her. She's my baby. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Okay. Come here. It's all right. As I was saying, I'm very sensitive to medication, so the process of stepping down on my medication put me in a weird headspace, so I wanted to focus on doing that and not filming, which actually leads me into the topic of today's video. It's inspired by me stepping off of my medication. I've been wanting to talk about it for a while. Yes, ma'am. Yes, this is too close. Yes. I love you. Yes, are you done? Okay, so yeah, no, she's just going to do whatever she does. What I wanted to talk about was the big question that I had when I first started this intense mental health journey a few years ago, which is, are antidepressants worth it? I know it's a big question, and disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. I don't claim to be. I also don't claim that my experience is universal. Every person is unique. Every brain chemistry is unique. And I think it's very important that you discuss any potential medication with your healthcare team. And my experience is not going to be your experience. However, I remember from when I was trying to decide if antidepressants were a good idea for me. I did a lot of research and watching people's videos on YouTube and other places about what the experience was like for people, and that gave me a little bit of an insight into, potential ways that I could be affected or ways that antidepressants could or could not work for me. I found that very helpful. So I wanted to put my little 2 cents out about that. Yes, ma'am. Okay. So, because, again, not a doctor, not a scientist, I don't have extensive knowledge about the subject. For the purposes of the video, I'm going to focus on what I have experience with and what I've been able to do research on. So specifically, I'm going to be talking about one type of antidepressants, which are SSRIs. And that is because, number one, they are the most commonly prescribed antidepressant, and also they're the type that I've been on. Yes, ma'am. Also, this therapy dog's been really helpful lately. I will leave some information in the description below about the other types of antidepressants in case you're curious and want some more information on those. Just check down below. SSRIs, I can tell you a little bit about based on what I know. Yes, ma'am. If you don't know, SSRI stands for Selective Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitor. And essentially what that does is increases the level of serotonin in your brain. Serotonin is one of the neurotransmitters that sends messages between your brain and the nerve cells in your body. And this can help with all sorts of things, including stabilizing your mood, helping with sleep, improving digestion, helping with bone health, as well as many other things. It's a very important hormone and neurotransmitter for your body. Resources below. Yes, ma'am. The FDA has approved it to treat all sorts of disorders, not just depression, and a few of those are general anxiety disorder, bipolar depression, OCD, social anxiety disorder. A little bit more of an extensive list here if you're curious. For me, it was prescribed for my clinical depression as well as anxiety. If you want any more information about it, I would suggest doing your own research, checking out some of the links below. Let's get into my story specifically. Yes, ma'am. Looking back on it now, I would say that I have dealt with episodes of depression to varying degrees since I was a child. I didn't really know that that's what it was at the time, but I've recently gotten a hold of some of my old diary entries from elementary, middle, and high school, and flipping through some of those and reading them, it's very obvious that what I was dealing with was depression. It probably started around the time when my parents divorced when I was 9, and that was because there was a lot of trauma and upheaval during that time in my life, and I was already a very emotional child. I felt things very deeply, and so the sort of difficult and heavy emotions of that kind of experience really hit me hard. And the timing of that right before adolescence probably didn't help either. So I would say into my middle school years is where things first kind of got really difficult. I want to give a little trigger warning here that I'm going to be talking about suicidal ideation, and if that's something that's not good for you to be hearing where you're at in your journey now, please fast forward. I'll insert a little time when I'm done talking about it here. There was one entry in my diary in particular that I read about that I wrote, I believe in 6th or 7th grade, when I talked about how I wanted to commit suicide, and I don't think I really knew what that was. Like, I didn't have a full grasp of the concept of suicide at that age, but from what I described, I was just done with my life at the time, and I didn't really see a way to get past the negative feelings that I was having, and I couldn't really see a way out. And I guess maybe I had heard about it somewhere or just thought abstractly about killing myself, and that's when it popped up for me the first time. I would say things calmed down a little bit at home after that a few years later, and so I think that helped for a little while, and also just things are so crazy when you're a teenager anyways. I don't know, probably just got distracted by life. When I was 17, my junior year of high school, I was in a pretty bad car accident with some friends of mine, and between the injuries that I had from the accident themselves and sort of the social and emotional aftermath of all of that, I fell into probably my most intense period of depression to date. That was the first time that I went to therapy for my depression. Ma'am. Come on. Thank you. So my mom became really worried about me after I wasn't really coming out of the funk, which was caused a lot by the fact that my injuries weren't fully diagnosed for almost a year or so after the accident, because doctors kind of assumed that I was just being a moody teenager who didn't want to go to school. That was my first experience with that severe level of gaslighting from doctors as well, and that really wasn't something I was prepared for at 17. That episode of depression kind of resolved itself after therapy and finally getting diagnosed and finally finding some treatments that began to help for the physical symptoms that I was going through, and I made some adjustments in my life plans and carried on. Went to college for the first few years, everything was fine, ups and downs as you have in your late teens, early 20s. Then my junior year of university, I went abroad for a semester, and that was the first time I'd been to Amsterdam, and I was there for a 4-month study abroad program, which completely changed my life in all of the cliche ways. It was just very mind-opening and a lot to process, I think. And one of the most surprising aspects was that the culture shock of me coming back to the US after I had been abroad was much more difficult and much more intense for me than the culture shock of moving there to begin with, which I was wildly unprepared for. That began, I would say, another pretty lengthy period of depression for me that took me a while to recognize. I did discuss with some counselors with the study abroad program that my university had that helped me sort of understand that what I was going through wasn't abnormal. You know, this happens to a lot of people when they, move between cultures. And I also ended up seeing a therapist at my university who helped me a lot to identify some of my main triggers and worries. So I started to really kind of understand that I was having a life crisis of, what am I going to do with my future? Because I felt like that time abroad really changed the things that I wanted for my life. I'll never forget what this therapist said to me because it was so surprising to me. I didn't understand how a university therapist could say something like this to me, but he told me after we had had some sessions and really kind of got to the root of what I was going through and the stress I was experiencing at the time. He said to me, it seems like you don't really want to be here anymore. Maybe your time here is up. Maybe it's time for you to move on to something else. That shocked me because, number one, he works at the university, and I had this idea that why would someone who works at the university be encouraging me to leave the university? But also because I was in what was supposed to be my final year at university, and it had never really crossed my mind that I couldn't change course at that point in my life. I kind of had already decided, I'm in it. This is what I'm going to do. There's no changing it. But something about him saying those things to me really helped give me permission to change my mind and to realize that I wanted to pivot and do something different with my life. I don't have it all figured out, but what I do know is that I want to move back to Amsterdam. So I decided to take some time off of school. At first it was temporary and then quickly became permanent. And I stayed living with my college roommate for another few months until she was done with school, and I had worked for a few months to save up as much money as possible. I moved back to live with a friend near my hometown for another year and worked as hard as I could to save up as much money as possible so that I could make that dream of moving back to Amsterdam a reality. Along the way, we decided to do the move together. So we both, after a lot of nuance that we don't have time to get into here, we finally moved back to Amsterdam in November of 2014. I would say my mental state was pretty steady there for a while. Looking back on it now, hindsight is 2020. I would say that I was functionally depressed during that time because there was a lot I had wrapped up in an old boyfriend that lived there and a lot of other just young adulthood things that I hadn't given myself the time to sort out. So functionally depressed for the next few years until after a surgery I had about 4 years later, almost in spring of 2018. So we'll fast forward. Several things about that surgery triggered my depression pretty severely again. For starters, there was an issue with my anesthesia during that surgery, and that was extremely traumatic. It also triggered the sense of helplessness that I had had after the original injury that I was having surgery for. And it just triggered a lot of old traumas and anxiety that I have around feeling out of control of my life. I lived alone at the time. I somewhat recently had a pretty emotional breakup and sort of drawing out of bad decisions with that ex. Basically, it was just a lot of things at once that accumulated, and by about spring 2018, I had sort of realized that I needed help. I needed to do something. I very bravely and after much hesitation reached out to my primary doctor to explain what had been going on. Trigger warning, I'm going to be talking about suicide for a little bit, and here's another time to fast forward to if this isn't something that's healthy for you to listen to now. I had realized that I had been suicidal for quite some time. I didn't have a specific plan to kill myself, but I did think of all of the various ways that I could do it and how I would do it and what that would mean and how that would go and would anybody really miss me, like all of those sorts of thoughts I've been having regularly for quite some time, and I realized that's not good. Thankfully, my doctor was extremely receptive to that, immediately got me in to see the psychologist that they had on staff. I got put on a waiting list to see a psychiatrist and pretty quickly had a very supportive team of doctors and healthcare professionals really monitoring me and making sure that I was making all the right choices for my mental health at the time. I think they took my depression and my being suicidal very seriously, and I'm very grateful for that because I know that it doesn't always go that way for people. Pretty immediately, they suggested antidepressants. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I am very sensitive to medications, and so that was one of my biggest hesitations, as I was worried that I would have all sorts of weird side effects. I'd be that one person that had all of the terrible side effects that could happen. I was afraid of losing myself and my personality. I was afraid I was going to get numbed from it. I was afraid of losing my sex drive because I had heard that that was a pretty common side effect, and that's a very integral part to my personality. I went back and forth for a little while. However, there was a moment that I think I've discussed in other videos, but I was working on a burlesque project and just something clicked one day when I realized what I'm doing right now is not enough. I do in fact have a passion in this world that I want to pursue burlesque, and if I want to see that through, I need more help than I'm getting right now. And so I decided to go on the medication. I stepped up gradually and tried to follow all of the orders of the doctors as closely as possible. They suggest to avoid alcohol while you're adjusting to the medication, which I strictly did for the 6 weeks, because at that point, once I decided I was getting this intense help, I wanted to follow it by the letter, like do exactly what I was supposed to do. So I was getting as much back from this as possible. I'd made my mental health my complete and utmost priority at this time. One of the important things I want to note here is that my psychologist and psychiatrist, both, and my primary doctor, they're all very clear with me that antidepressants are not a quick fix for depression. It's not like you take them and it immediately goes away. They should be used as a tool in connection with a fuller treatment plan designed by you and your healthcare team. They shouldn't be seen as a quick fix. That's not what they do. That's not how they work. My magical combination was to gradually step up to 20 milligrams of the SSRI, which is escitalopram. That's the generic form of Lexapro, which I think is a pretty common one people might have heard of, prescribed for, I think, usually depression or anxiety. That dose of medication with CBT therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's not right for everyone, and I have heard that there's a bit of discourse within the psychology and psychiatric sphere on whether or not it's an effective form of treatment, but I know for me at the time it was the best option. About a year after that, I was cleared from therapy, and my psychiatrist wanted me to stay on the medication at the level I was on for about a year as I was stable, because that's the best way to help really cement the new healthy habits that I had developed from the therapy and to help really sort of settle my body chemistry. So there was a year on therapy and medication, and then a year on just the medication and occasional check-ins with my therapists and doctors. And then after that point, the plan was to step off of the medication because I had never wanted to be on it long term, and that was always a goal that my doctors and I had, which was to eventually try and step off of it if I could. So at that point, I started to step off, slow and gradual step off, because of how my body responded to going on the medication and just what they suggest in general. It's easier for your body to adjust if you do it more gradually. Definitely do not just immediately stop taking it. That is not good for your body or your mind or your spirit, I might add. However, I only got down a slight bit on the dosage because this was fall 2020 and there were some more stressors in my life happening at the time. There was the global situation, as we all know, and some other personal things that were happening. So my doctor and I decided to not step down anymore at the time. Long story short, then I moved back to the US, and that was also a very chaotic and tumultuous period in a lot of ways. So I maintained that level of my medication till a few weeks ago when I discussed with my doctor how, I had settled in here and I really felt a lot more stable, and we decided to gradually try to step down a little bit more. And overall, it went really well. I mentioned earlier I had some weird side effects, very dizzy, shaky, kind of cloudy, and I kind of just felt wasted for a couple of weeks as I was stepping off. And the way that I do it that works best for me, that my doctor had originally suggested when I first started the medication, was to every other day for 2 weeks, do the higher dose, lower dose, higher dose, lower dose, until after 2 weeks you just end up on the new dose of medication. And that worked very well for me. I now feel like I'm in a place where I feel level at the lower dose now, and that's great. The next step will be to continue stepping down with my doctor's monitoring in the future, and I'm looking forward to that. To circle back around to the original question, are antidepressants worth it? I think, to put it simply, for me, I would say yes, absolutely, without a doubt. Going on antidepressants was one of the best decisions I have ever made in my life. It has brought me so much more good than bad. That being said, I did have some side effects, which are part of the reason why I wanted to try to step back off the medication. I had some issues with extreme fatigue, which I already have problems with because of other conditions. I had some issues with my sex drive and libido, issues orgasming, unfortunate things like that. And also, I want to see if it's maybe causing some of my blood pressure and heart rate issues. So I'll keep you posted on whether or not those things continue to improve as I continue to step off of medication. Hopefully what you got from this long-winded explanation, interrupted by a lot of needy fluffiness, is that yes, antidepressants were a great choice for me. And I hope that if you're trying to decide whether or not to go on them, that this has been helpful. And I hope that if you make that same choice, that they do good for you as well. Please look out for my video that I mentioned about decolonizing your holidays, and I will see you all soon. Bye. I don't know why I thought that filming with her in here was a good idea. Can I film, please? There we go. Oh yes, in my lap. That's fine. Okay, you've ruined. You're making this difficult. We're gonna adjust to meet her needs. Could we not itch while I'm doing this? Could you stop panting, please? Lay down. Lay down. Please. Come here. I love you. What are you gonna do? Make a choice.